Welcome to On the Verge. This is Zach Spedden, joined as always by Bob Phelan and Nick Stevens. On the Verge is part of Baltimore Sports and Life Radio. And on tonight's episode, we're joined by a special guest as Ben Badler, senior writer of Baseball America, joins us on the podcast. Ben provides baseball analysis, prospect rankings, and scouting reports for the publication. And he was kind enough to join us tonight. Ben, how are you?
I'm doing great, guys. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate this.
We really appreciate having you on. So, a lot of followers of minor league baseball know you for your coverage of Baseball America, and over the years, that has focused a lot on the international free agent market. And in your mind, just how big of a difference is the Orioles' presence in Latin America and in the international market as a whole since Mike Elias took over compared to where it was before?
I don't even know that there's a word to describe how big of a difference it is. I mean, it's for years. I mean, the Orioles. I mean, you had the Marlins and maybe a couple other teams that were sort of laggards, getting really heavily involved in international signings. But the Orioles were just kind of on their own island in terms of just being completely out of the loop and out of the picture and a total non-factor when it came to signing amateur players of any noteworthiness from particularly from the Dominican Republic and Venezuela. You saw them dip in and sign some some Cuban free agents every now and then, and they would sign some players from Asia, and then of course they stepped on their own feet in some instances over there as well. But I mean, you can see like who's the best international prospect in like the upper levels of the minor league system right now for the Orioles. Like it just they they just don't exist, and it's unfortunate because it's such a rich source of talent, and there's so many good players obviously coming out of there. I mean, you just look around the division and you see Vladdy Jr. and Wander Franco and Devers and Bogarts. it's and the Yankees, have done a nice job there too. So it's just totally different now that they're willing to spend. I mean, you're still you're going to see some lag time in between when you're actually signing these players, and obviously the market moves so fast. So even when Elias came in and the ownership decided to change their approach, and they brought in Kobe Perez, so, these guys are doing a really good job there, but still you're operating years behind other clubs, not only in terms of just building out your own staff there as an organization, but trying to be competitive to sign the top players. The other clubs have already kind of beat you to the punch on a lot of those guys, which is why this most recent signing class was kind of a different boat for them, and they got opportunistic in the previous signing period with guys like Samuel Basayo and Michael Hernandez when those guys became available to sign. But yeah, now it's the Orioles are now just like any other team internationally, whereas before it was 29 teams, and then the Orioles were kind of off doing their own thing, or really, just not doing much of anything.
And as fans, obviously this is new to Orioles fans, but it's tough to evaluate just how good an international signing class is outside of how much players sign for compared to other players and what little we read about from you and other outlets. So could you give us an idea of how well the Orioles did compared to other teams in this newest class?
Yeah, I mean that's one of the tough things right now is that when I started covering international players in 2008, and over the for those first few years, you would have players who would reach commitments to sign with a club before July 2nd, but it would be maybe months before July 2nd, right? So everybody's seeing these guys and evaluating these players. And they started with a bonus pool system in, I believe, 2012. And that, the deals just started getting earlier and earlier. So I've been writing about this for, close to a decade now, but it's just gotten to the point where you have clubs and players who are committing to a club 2 years plus in advance of when they're eligible to sign. And then, of course, MLB moved the signing date back with COVID from July 2nd to January 15th. So add another 6 months. And, it's not like in the United States where, all right, you have the top freshmen or, I mean, geez, even eighth graders in the country. It's kind of ridiculous, but it's just how the process works. Like, these kids commit to a college, when they're in eighth or ninth grade. And all right, well, then it's not like nobody sees a kid except for Mississippi State or Vanderbilt or wherever they're going to school. Everybody sees all these players leading up to basically the day of the draft almost. But internationally, once you commit to a team, then that player essentially stops being seen, at least in a competitive environment, consistently by the 29 other clubs, not necessarily because they're being hidden by that club. It's just, well, all right, if I already have an agreement in place with a club, why am I going to spend money going around and doing all these showcases and going to all these different academies and, maybe traveling even overseas to different events when, I already have $1 million deal in place with, somebody else. So, that's made it even trickier, that, and then obviously COVID makes makes things even more challenging, both for us and obviously for for clubs too, just trying to evaluate players. So it's just a situation right now where unfortunately it's particularly difficult to evaluate just how good an international signing class is for one team relative to another, and these guys change so much too. I mean, that's one of my favorite things is, especially in 2019 before the pandemic started, was, these kids signed on July 2nd, and then they go into their team academies. So, and they'll play these unofficial games against each other, and what's called Tricky League or Dominican Instructional League. So more games. So just going around and seeing all those players that, almost every team's class I was able to see them playing games. And it's amazing how much these players, when they're 16, 17, can change just so much in 3 months, 4 months, 8 months, or, especially in some of these cases where people haven't seen them in, a year or 2 years in some instances. So, they grow an inch, grow 2 inches, put on 30 pounds. They start, going from a 7'2" runner to a 6'7" runner. So you're seeing tool grades jumps from, a full grade, 2, 3 full grades. It's just not like anything you really see from, certainly from a typical AA player or a college guy, anything like that. So it's, yeah, like I was saying, it's just the difference in information on those guys. Even if you were to ask, a team about, another team's players, they're probably not going to have super detailed information on those guys. So it's just the reality of how challenging it is to kind of stack up one class against the other right now, especially because, I mean, look, sometimes and pretty frequently, a team will tell me, hey, like, we signed this guy for, $300,000-400,000 or maybe even less, and this guy might be already the best guy in our class. So things can definitely change pretty quickly when we're talking about players who are obviously 16, 17 years old for the top guys a lot of times.
Nice. Speaking of this year's class in particular for the Orioles, what can you tell us a little bit about some of these top guys they signed? And Braylon Tavera, Leandro Arias. Were you able to see some of these guys that got some of the bigger signing bonuses that Orioles fans are more familiar with right now? Have you been able to see them play? What kind of things stuck out to you with this class?
Yeah, Tavera, I saw playing in the Dominican Prospect League, but again, it was like 2 years ago. Got some updated information on him, obviously, since then. But I mean, physically stood out. Really, athletic center fielder, good speed, pretty solid tools across the board. I don't know. There's like one other than maybe just the speed that really jumps out at you, but has a lot of things that teams prioritize as an athletic player who can has a good chance to stick at a premium position.
So, or as you know, Orioles fans really are sort of just getting used to this process of the team being relevant during the international signing period.
Right.
But right now, what kind of looms in the background is the possibility of an international draft at some point in the future. In your opinion, are we close to that happening, or do you think that that's kind of down the road and maybe still a little bit of a hypothetical?
I think it is very likely to happen in this upcoming CBA. I think the owners want an international draft. They pushed hard for it in the last CBA. I mean, you can go back and look at, I mean, when Sandy Alderson was at MLB, and I want to say like 1992 or something, they were guaranteeing that an international draft was going to come. So I can understand why people might think, oh, well, they've been saying this forever, and there still hasn't been an international draft. But I think at this point, look, the owners still want to draft, and the MLBPA pushed back last time, but then ultimately caved in on a hard spending cap. So I think the owners were pretty thrilled with that because I think their primary concern was to contain their labor costs, because you had the previous system where teams were, you had a bonus pool in place, and then you had most of the league pretty much, it was not a hard cap, so you could blow past your bonus pool and just not be able to sign players for more than $300,000 for the next two signing periods. But teams realized, oh, well, we could just have like one big signing class, or we could sign a guy like Yohan Moncada or a Luis Robert, and we can still get pretty good players for less than $300,000 in the Dominican Republic and in Venezuela. So it wasn't much of a deterrent. But when they got that hard cap, I think the owners had to have been high fiving each other, but they still want an international draft. I think one of the goals is to slow down the speed of these commitments that we were talking about earlier. And then the Players Association doesn't represent international amateur players, right? Their constituents or their members are the players who are on 40-man rosters. So, it's nothing particular against, Dominican or Venezuelan players. If, we've seen the same thing happen in the draft in the United States with spending restrictions getting put into place in the draft, or the way that minor league baseball players are treated and are paid. If you're not on a 40-man roster, the MLBPA is not really looking out for, for you, and they're going to use those players as a bargaining chip to get something in exchange for the 40-man roster players. So right now, it's not a high it's not a high priority for either side. I don't think, like, or certainly not for the MLBPA, which is why I think it's likely to come, and the union will get some. I don't know if it's going to be a big benefit or a smaller benefit in exchange, but I think it's likely to come. But there's obviously so many bigger issues that they have to work through, and sure we all hope that they work through to actually come to an agreement. But I do think it's coming. I could see it coming as soon as next year. But obviously it's all to be determined by this negotiation right now.
In the last few years since Elias took over, it seems like every time he makes a trade, he gets at least one or two international prospects thrown in at the back end of a deal. How important was that for the Orioles to have them thrown in as final pieces in deals the past few years? We love Gene Pinto. We think he has a huge amount of upside. And you also have guys like Michel Dasson, Isaac De Leon, and Elia Prado. They seem to have some pretty solid upside too.
Yeah, I think it's become a more common tactic to try to poach other teams, particularly like lower level international players, before they get famous or before they get to low A. Obviously, the Padres did a pretty all right job with that, right? With like Fernando Tatis Jr. or Yordan Alvarez too. Freddie Peralta was in the lower levels when the Brewers traded for him. So it's these guys who are, I mean, and sometimes it's just, all right, well, it's a far away lottery ticket. Would we rather have him or the double A reliever whose upside is, like probably realistic, like an up and down relief type arm. All right, well, maybe we gamble and just hope for a little bit more upside. And if it doesn't work out, not much lost here, right? Um, but obviously, you could also hit a huge, I would say, grand slam in the case of, a Tatis Jr. or an Alvarez, somebody like that. So definitely hear from a lot of different clubs that are like, man, we had like 9 different DSL guys asked for in trades, and you do that because you hope that the other GM or team president or whoever the ultimate decision maker is thinking, well, I don't know, like this guy's in the DSL. I'm not even sure I know who he is. I don't even know if I'm going to have a job by the time this kid ever gets to the big leagues, and I want to win now. So let's get this trade done. But I do get the sense now that teams are or GMs are more protective of those players because they don't want to be the guy that's known for trading Fernando Tatis Jr., right? So it's getting a little bit harder to pluck those guys away, but it makes sense to target those guys before they pop and get to low A and get famous and start populating a top 100 list, and then it's much more challenging to be able to trade for somebody like that.
Nice. We are big on the belief that Gene Pinto is that next Fernando Tatis guy, but we'll see in a couple of years. One thing that we really love diving into the system is finding the hidden gems that a lot of other fans just aren't aware of. And one name that popped up in a lot of articles you wrote last year, looking back at last year's Orioles class, was this catcher by the name of Carlos Rodriguez. And that name just popped out to me, and I was curious kind of what stood out to you about Rodriguez and why you mentioned him a couple of times.
Carlos Rodriguez, and now I'm trying to because the Padres signed a Carlos Rodriguez too, so I'm trying to make sure I have my Venezuelan catcher is named Carlos Rodriguez.
Yeah, fairly generic
sorted
name.
out right, but yeah, I mean, he didn't play a ton this year, but it was kind of like a sleeper for them. Guy who sounds like his projects to stick behind the plate for them. Solid bat for a Venezuela or sorry, for a catcher his age 17 or 18 years old. Now 17, his first pro season, but just we just see so many catchers coming out of there. It's just pretty impressive. Like he's one of those guys where it's I don't think there's anything that you're going to see that you're going to be like, oh wow, like this is like really jumps out at you right away. But like there's so many guys who are in that mold where you just look up like by the end of their career and you're like, wow, that guy played in the big leagues for like 10 years. Not saying that's necessarily the case, right? And there's plenty of other players where they, just like that end up getting released out of A ball, but he has that, the ability to stay behind the plate and a pretty solid bat for his age. Where I think he's like you said, like a sleeper who could end up kind of sneaking up on some people as he moves up.
Are there any other players in your mind that fit that mold over the last signing class or two, especially for players that might be hitting low A or the Florida Complex League next year?
Yeah, the Orioles signed some pitchers in some of their recent classes who I think are pretty interesting guys, and that's especially where I think you can get some good values because I mean it's like there's so many. I mean I write up so many guys where it's like, oh, this guy is 88 to 91. Some feel for a breaking ball with a lot of projection, and it just feels like you write up so many guys with that same report, and then all of a sudden some of them end up popping and touching 94, and then they get stronger and they're throwing 97. So it's hard to know exactly which one of these guys are going to break out. I mean, there's certainly certain projection indicators that you can look for, but there is a lot of luck involved. So a lot of times you do see these pitchers who are just not signing for big money who end up being pretty good. But Yeah, I mean, like Raul Rangel, who they signed out of Venezuela, 6'4", just a ton of space on his body to fill out and throw harder. I think he's a pretty interesting guy. Moises Chase, another Venezuelan pitcher they signed, a right-handed pitcher who's not quite as big, but another guy with some good physical projection. Attacks hitters and has pretty good feel for spinning a curveball. So it's like that, like the 2019 class, and even last year, or to some extent, obviously they ended up getting Basayo and Hernandez are more premium guys. But when they were kind of working from behind on these other clubs, there's always pitching that can pop. So I think probably the pitching more so than some of the position players, or I don't exactly know who yet is going to be the one who pops from that group, but the pitching is definitely what I would be keeping an eye on from some of those recent classes from the past couple of years.
When it comes to the draft, this current regime seems to really like these college hitters. That seems to be primarily what they go after. But since we think this is probably the last time the Orioles will have this super high top 3 type of pick for at least quite a while, do you think that would lead them to consider a higher upside high school bat more than the past few years with the first pick? And who would you take if the draft was tomorrow with that?
Yeah, I think it's the one guy who jumps out to me as a high school hitter where I could see the Orioles going that route would be Termarr Johnson, a shortstop from Georgia, who is just phenomenal, pure hitter, baseball rat. Like he just, I think if you look at the Orioles picks, obviously like Adley Rutschman was kind of a no brainer, right? So like not a ton to glean from that one, but like you said, they've kind of gravitated toward those college hitters, guys who put the bat to the ball and have good approaches. Somebody like Elijah Green or Drew Jones, who are both obviously very good and if the draft is today, would go, I think, in the top 10 picks, if not the top 5 overall picks. And if some teams had the number 1 overall pick, like I think there are teams that would take each of those guys number 1 overall. But just looking at the Orioles track record and the philosophies and both of the organization and some of the the people who are there making the decisions, I think Termarr Johnson fits the mold for them as far as what they've looked for. I mean, Johnson, it's just such good, pure bat to ball skills, just a beautiful left-handed swing. You can knock him, I guess, because he's about 5'8" and kind of a thicker body. But I mean, he probably has, if not the best left-handed power in the high school class. He's got to be top 2 or 3. I have no concerns about his power. I think he has a chance to be, upside to be a 7 power guy, and is going to get to that power a lot in games just because of how good of a hitter he is. Like I said, he does have big raw power, but it's a hit first mentality. He'll put the ball in play, good plate coverage, use the whole field. And then when he gets his pitch, he just has such phenomenal whippy bat speed to, yank the ball out of the park and, out of any park. I mean, he was hitting balls to the, the back of the Trop at the Perfect Game National Showcase last summer. So, I think like, Drew Jones and Elijah Green have, big upside and a lot of really exciting athleticism and tools. But, if the Orioles do go with a high school guy at 1, I think Johnson would fit their mold a little bit more. And if I had the number 1 overall pick in the draft right now, I'd be taking Termarr too. I just love him. I think he's got a chance to be a really, really special hitter.
I'm sold.
Transitioning to kind of the system and the more the upper levels now, but you're known to have this affinity for short hitters players at the plate. And guys like Terran Vavra, Connor Norby, and even newly acquired Cesar Preto, how do they stack up against this ideal that you have in mind there?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I just talked about, Termarr. He kind of fits that mold. I mean, yeah, I think sometimes shorter hitters just get overlooked sometimes. I mean, Kobe Mayo, I love Kobe Mayo too, but it's easier to kind of see what jumps out about him right away. I think sometimes smaller players, you question, they get questioned about how much power are they going to have, um, and it can kind of work the other way too, where one of the most important things you can do as a hitter is to control the strike zone. And if you're 5'9", 5'10", some of these guys were 5'10" are listed at 5'10" are really 5'8", let's be honest. Like, you have a smaller strike zone. Pitchers have a narrower window where they have to come into you, and you just have less area to cover for your plate coverage compared to if you're 6'6", and if you're 6'6", you probably have really long arms. If you're 5'9", 5'10", you probably have shorter arms. I mean, there's guys like Miguel Cabrera who are big guys with short arms, and they're he's a mutant, so he's a different kind of guy. But there are advantages to being a shorter hitter and having a shorter strike zone, and shorter levers, and being more likely to all things being equal, to have a more compact, more efficient swing. So yeah, that's part of why I like Connor Norby. I mean, you just look at his track record at East Carolina. This guy is just a really, really good hitter. I really like that pick for the Orioles last year. It's just a good swing, a ton of barrels in games. He knows the strike zone, good pitch recognition. Don't know that he's going to have like a ton of power, but I think he fits in as a second baseman who's going to hit a lot and get on base at a really strong clip. So I think that's like I said, I really like that pick for them. I think he's going to be one of the better picks from that second round, I think.
So we asked ourselves this question on the show recently, and I'll pose it to you now. Who has the highest floor and the highest ceiling out of the group of Norby, Vavra, and Prieto?
Let's see. Norby, Vavra, and Prieto. I mean, I guess you might say floor just for Vavra, just with him being so advanced, or just being so much closer, I should say, um, to the big leagues right now. I still think I think the highest of Connor Norby of that group. So I think he probably has the most upside. Maybe you could argue floor. Like, I think he's going to move pretty quickly, or at least could move if the Orioles want to be, aggressive with him pretty quickly through the system. I could see him certainly finishing the year in Double-A and being in position to make an impact or at least reach the big leagues by 2023. So I'd go upside Norby, maybe floor Vavra, just because he is so much closer. But I think it's close between the two of them.
How rare is it for a team to have the best position player prospect and the best pitching prospect at the same time? And considering health and getting adjusted to the majors in 2022, is something like that something that could help turn things around a little bit faster at the major league level for the Orioles? Because we're dying for that to happen.
Yeah, I guess Ohtani doesn't count, right? But although we didn't have him number one at the time. It's a good. I don't know. We probably should look it up, because it's pretty impressive that the Orioles have between Adley and Grayson. I mean, it certainly was it was not like a slam dunk decision for us to put Adley Rutschman number one. I did think he was number one. I'm not just telling you guys that because I'm on an Orioles podcast. Like, I really did think, his ability. Look, the conversation was between him, Julio Rodriguez of the Mariners, and Bobby Witt Jr. of the Royals. Bobby Witt Jr., a shortstop with power and really good athlete, and has just breezed through the minor leagues. So premium position shortstop who could hit 40 plus home runs is pretty exciting. So is Julio Rodriguez, who's, maybe the best combination of like hit, on base and power in the minor leagues, and also is a really good athlete too, and has played some center field, but really is more of a corner outfielder, but could be, 400 plus on base and another 40 plus home run guy with good defense in right field. Whereas Rushman to me is, the risk, or the knock on him is just, it's kind of like it's a benefit and a drawback where, all right, he is a catcher, so he plays the most valuable position, but he's also just probably not going to play as many games regularly compared to Julio Rodriguez or Bobby Witt Jr. because you can't just throw a guy behind the plate for 162 games a year. So that's part of it. But I just thought, I mean, this guy is like the perfect catching prospect. Almost, it's I'm sure Orioles fans have kind of heard that maybe before, so maybe there's some hesitancy there. But like, man, I just switch hitting catcher who gets really good reviews defensively and then obviously offensively. I mean, I think it could be like a switch hitting Buster Posey type of type of career if everything goes right for him, where could be a plus hitter who does a great job of controlling the strike zone and hits for power too. So he's exciting. But then, yeah, I mean, Grayson Rodriguez has just like freakish stuff. I mean, again, like there was a conversation out, between him and Shane Baz with the Rays, and to some extent, I think George Kirby belongs in that conversation too with the Mariners. But even when we're just talking about it with a lot of scouts and pro scouting directors and other front office folks around the league that we just did within our staff, it was pretty consistent to like, yeah, like those other guys are good, and there's definitely a debate to be had, but a lot of I'd say the strong consensus seems to be leaning toward Grayson Rodriguez because it's just the most complete arsenal, I think, of any of those guys. I mean, Shane Baz has really, really good stuff, and give him a ton of credit for the way he's able to throw a lot more strikes this past year. But I think Grayson Rodriguez has an even deeper repertoire, throwing 100 miles an hour, just like a wipeout slider, a really good changeup too, a curveball that really works for him too. So you got 4 pitches that can miss bats. So if on any given day, if like the changeup isn't working as well today, you can go to the slider more or vice versa. So he just has so many different weapons to miss bats, a track record of throwing strikes and just racking up a ton of strikeouts. So usually I'm more conservative on pitchers, but I really do think, if he shows he has the durability to, hold up 180 plus innings for a full season, I think he really does have the upside to be a number 1 type starter.
Nice. I'm sure a lot of Orioles fans just like to hear you keep talking about those 2 guys for an hour and a half.
I could keep going on Grayson and Adley. Man, those guys are special.
Yeah. And DL Hall too. I mean, you and Chris on your own podcast, the hype you guys had for DL Hall was comforting to hear, especially after his injury last year. But, looking at something that we've noticed, the Orioles aren't as deep as the Rays. They may not be as deep as some of these other farm systems out there, but we put together our own top 30, expanded it to 50. And like, we like the depth that Mike Elias is putting together here. But is that important to have, whether it be for future trades or just the cream rising to the top, or does it really come down to Adley, Grayson, DL Hall living to their future projections?
I mean, so like the majority of the value that is going to drive the value of the farm system and is going to have an impact at the major league level is going to be, a guy like Adley or Grayson Rodriguez. Like there's no amount of like depth of prospects. Like if, another team came to you and said, hey, we'll give you, our number 7 and 12 and 14 and 19 and 32 and 37 prospects and give us Grayson Rodriguez, you'd be like, no, that's not, we're not doing that. That's like, we have an, potential number 1 starter. We have, Adley Adley Rutschman, a potential franchise catcher right here. I mean, the value just historically of, particularly on the position side. I mean, I was going to say the value of a top 25 overall prospect in baseball, particularly a position prospect, is extremely. It's just an extremely strong track record. Not because we're so smart at Baseball America or anything like that. I'm sure you could look at anybody else's list and see the same thing. Because all right, those are just like the obvious guys, right? That pretty much everybody is going to have there. And in particular, if you look at the track record of like the top, the number one prospect in the game or top three guys, I mean, you get certainly, you have some whiffs in there, but you also have, Hall of Famers in there or guys who, should be in the Hall of Fame in some cases. So, yeah, I mean, those really top elite guys drive the value of the farm system, but yeah, having that depth too is important because you will have guys pop up from, the lower levels or guys who, maybe just get overlooked for whatever reason. Maybe they're not like the toolsiest guys in the world, but they perform and they hit, and maybe they have some questions on the profile, but they end up kind of being sneaky good big leaguers. So the depth of the system is important too, to go with those really elite top high end guys. And that's where I think having an international program that's, just having an international program is going to have a major impact on that. Because you can see like the upper levels of the system, like we were saying before, you just don't have international prospects there, because for years the Orioles were just neglecting the international market. So the depth of players from Latin America is really thin at the upper levels. So it takes time, right? Like the main class, the takeover classes for Kobe Perez when he took over was 2019. So all those guys are pretty much still in rookie ball right now. So it's going to take some time. Those years where the Orioles were ignoring Latin America are going to continue to hurt them for their prospect depth. But I'm sure we're going to see that change over the next few years as these guys start to make their way up the system, and you see some more depth that way.
Sometimes you see comments about the Orioles player development system that are about their approach to the plate, where they really focus on increasing the walk rate last year, focus on exit velocity, power projection. Is this something that maybe the Orioles are a little bit unique in their hitting program, or is this an area that a lot of teams are focusing right now?
Yeah, I think it's, there's other teams certainly with similar approaches. I mean, a lot of this, the way that you teach it and the way that you structure it and the way that you, the way that you speak to players about it, the way you organize your coaching staff, your player development staff around it, some of the different techniques that you use for players, or the data that you choose to show them, or how you choose to communicate that is different. But I mean, a lot of it goes back to Ted Williams, and then probably even before him, about just getting a good pitch to hit. Right. So a lot of these teams, I think, have this similar core philosophies about hitting. Now, I do think there are some teams that, other clubs that maybe care less about strikeouts and are trying to get guys to, pull the ball in the air more, that kind of stuff. So there's definitely different philosophies out there. But yeah, like you said, I think the Orioles definitely, both in terms of the players that they target through scouting, through their acquisitions at the amateur or professional level too, through trades, they're looking for guys who make a lot of contact, who are not chasing pitches out of the zone, make good decisions with the pitches that they choose to swing that, and they try to drill down on that in their player in their player development approach as well.
Just a couple more questions. As we look ahead at possible breakout candidates this year, What are your thoughts on the previously mentioned Kobe Mayo in his 6'5" power frame?
Yeah, I think he's one of the better breakout candidates really in all of the minor leagues. Kind of I just wish he was healthy for all of last year. He's 2020 draft pick out of high school, obviously like a big bonus over slot guy in the fourth round. And I think they just kind of held him back in the complex league in part from like a knee issue, I think it was that he had. And you could still see some of that sounded like on defense, but man, offensively, this guy was crushing it. But between the complex league and then when he got bumped up to Del Marva too. So, big raw power from him and, some swing and miss, but not a ton for a guy who's 6'5", where, that would be your concern on somebody like him, particularly coming out of high school. Um, so he actually does a pretty good job of keeping the strikeouts to a pretty manageable level for a pretty big, long levered guy. Does have a pretty good approach too. So kind of a smaller ish sample size from him. A 2020 high school player who spent about half of his debut at least in the complex league. So you do want to see him do it at a higher level, and you start to see him do that. But certainly a guy where a lot of the arrows are pointing in the right direction. So, some risk just because he is so big, he maybe ends up at first base. But I mean, first baseman out of mash, but I think he will. Like, I mean, I'd love to see him be able to stay at third base. Obviously, that would make him even more valuable. But he has a type of offensive upside where even if it does end up being first base, he might be able to handle it over there too.
Definitely super excited about Mayo's potential. But another guy that I think Orioles fans are becoming a little bit more and more excited about is Jordan Westberg. And from some of the companion pieces that came out over at Baseball America to the top 100 list, it seems like Westberg is going to be the next Oriole to crack y'all's top 100 list. He's got a full year under his belt, 3 levels. What does his outlook look like at this point?
Yeah, definitely a lot of guys internally at BA were pretty high on him. So we had him, sixth in the Orioles system coming in, and I think we have 5 Orioles on our top 100 right now. So I think he's kind of sneaking up on that conversation of guys who could pop in there next. But yeah, I mean, shortstop with plus speed, like you talked about, pretty good track record. Maybe scuffled a little bit when he got to Double-A, but otherwise a pretty good track record. Even just going back to Mississippi State of hitting, putting the bat to the ball. I think there's some sneaky power in there. Maybe like I don't think he's going to be like a big power guy, but he does have like some strength to him. But I think it's probably more of a hit over power guy who relies on contact and making good decisions at the plate and being able to put the ball in play, get on base at a pretty good clip. So yeah, I think he's certainly kind of right on that cusp of if we went to 150, I think he'd certainly be within that range. So he's kind of putting himself close to that top 100 conversation if he goes out and I think he probably goes back to Double-A, I should say, to start this year. And if he's off to a really good start in there, I think we'll probably see him in that top 100 pretty soon.
About a year ago this time, Heston Kjerstad was a consensus top 100 prospect among the outlets that cover the minor leagues. Obviously, his recovery from myocarditis is a big concern at this point, but if he is healthy, fully healthy and ready to go in 2022, gets a full season, and what will he have to do to work his way back into that top 100 conversation?
Yeah, that's like kind of like the huge X factor in that system right now. Because I mean, he was the second overall pick in the draft. I mean, I'm not saying he was the second best player in that draft. Obviously, there was some financial considerations involved there, but just hasn't played for 2 years, right? So there's such a huge wild card because when he was healthy, I mean, he was one of the best hitters in college baseball and in the SEC, and had plus if not plus power. So everything. I mean, if you really believe in him, you can see a middle of the order bat, but they're also, didn't play in 2021. The health issue you were talking about, and really, it's not like your confidence level in a guy from what you saw in college in 2020 could be the same as it would be in a normal year because they barely played college baseball in 2020. Um, so there's just, different situations, obviously, but like somebody like him or like Royce Lewis with the Twins, dealing with an injury where he missed all the season, where it's like, you have these guys who seem like they're super talented, but it's tough to go off of information from like a couple years ago on these guys, right? Like we're talking about it with these international players from earlier, and we've seen a lot more from, or at least at a higher level from Kerstad, but yeah, just such a wild card, such an X factor. Where I mean, yeah, there's like an outcome where we're talking, maybe by the All-Star break, and he's a top 50 prospect in baseball, but we just gotta get him on the field really, and just see how he looks this year.
We could do this all night, and we can't thank you enough once more for doing this. But we'll end on this one. With Rutschman and Rodriguez highly likely to graduate from the list in the first half of the season, do the Orioles have enough firepower to maintain a steady presence near the top of the organizational list between having the first pick in every round in this upcoming draft and current players rising, or are they going to take a pretty significant step back in the next update?
I think they'll still be, I don't know if they'll be the number one system. Some of these other organizations at the top, although the Rays seem to always be up there. But yeah, I mean, it'll, I guess, hurt in quotes losing, or graduating Rushman and probably Rodriguez as well. But like the Blue Jays, right, with like Vladdy and Bo, like that's what you want to do with the players. But like you said, having another, pick in the top of the draft and just the other high end picks that come with it and all the money that comes with it, you have, these guys won't all, be big, risers, but, you have candidates like, Colton Cowser or Westberg or Mayo, who we were talking about, who have or a Connor Norby, who have a chance to really move up, and some of them will flatline too, because that's just what happens with, with prospects. They're not all going to work out, but I suspect I don't think the Orioles are going to contend for a World Series trophy this year. So I suspect they're probably going to be in a position where they're going to be trading for prospects again come the trade deadline. So you'll probably see some more prospects coming into the organization that way. So I think we'll still see. My bet with the Orioles, I would say conservatively, would still be a top 10 system in baseball when we're, hopefully having this conversation again next year. And I would say there's a pretty good chance they'll still be a top 5 system in the game too.
Well, Ben, we really appreciate your time. Thank you for coming on. Before you sign off, just let our listeners know what you're working on and where they can follow you on Twitter.
Yeah, we just came out with our top 100 prospects at Baseball America. We got the prospect handbook for sale. So if you go to baseballamerica.com, you get the top 30 or really the top 40 prospects in each organization. So if you buy the handbook, we like to give you some 10 bonus names and bonus reports through there that aren't just on the website. So yeah, I mean, it's, the lockout sucks. I'm definitely anti-lockout, but like, man, there's just so much in baseball going on right now between college baseball starting, all of our prospect coverage, minor league baseball. These guys are still going to play. Not the 40-man guys. Maybe right away it'll be a little bit awkward for them, but there's a ton of prospects we're still keeping track of international signings, and then obviously the draft. I mean, Tamar Johnson's still going to be playing baseball. Like, he's not locked out. Like, we're going to be covering all these guys. So it's just a fun time of year where obviously the major leagues are in a little bit of a lull right now as far as action there. But if you're following prospects, we definitely appreciate everybody following along at Baseball America with all the coverage we're cranking out right now.
Well, Ben, thank you again. So we really appreciate your insight and for you joining us tonight.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you guys for having me on. I appreciate it.